So, first half of the course, we've been exploring physicalism, the view that reality is wholly physical in nature. We've looked at some arguments in support of this view, and we've also looked in some detail at a series of related arguments that try to show that physicalism can't possibly be true because it can't account for the reality of consciousness. And we've looked at responses to those arguments. So it's often assumed, both in philosophical literature and in public discourse, that the only alternative to physicalism is dualism. So dualism being the view that as well as physical things that are the subject matter of physical science, there are also immaterial souls or minds. View most associated perhaps historically with René Descartes. So it's often assumed if you're not a physicalist, oh, you must be a dualist. However, in the recent philosophical literature, there's been a lot of discussion of a middle way between physicalism and dualism. A view that promises to avoid both the problems associated with physicalism on the one hand and the problems associated with dualism on the other. And this is the view that's become known as Russellian Monism. And this is going to be the topic of the second half of our course. So Russellian Monism gets its name from this guy, Bertrand Russell, because it's largely inspired by a couple of claims Russell defended in his book The Analysis of Matter in 1927. Also, interestingly, in the same year, the great scientist Arthur Eddington, in his Gifford lectures, defended very similar ideas. Eddington, the first scientist to confirm general relativity. This is Eddington played by David Tennant in the BBC production from 2008, Einstein and Eddington, which talks about this event when he confirmed Einstein's theory. So this is not a new view from the 1920s, but it's sort of got completely forgotten about for the latter half, most of the latter half of the 20th century. I think because it didn't really fit with the physicalist zeitgeist at the time. But it's recently been rediscovered in the philosophical literature. So in 2011 there was a book called Consciousness and the Prospects of Physicalism by de Pereboom. Half of that is defending Russellian monism, and half of it is defending a kind of eliminativism about consciousness, the kind of view we were looking at last week, and he just doesn't know which is right, because they're both worth exploring. Then in 2015, there's a collection, Consciousness in the Physical World, I should say, by Alter and Nagasawa. Just the name of this course, is that the course name after? Which is a series of essays on Russellian monism, for and against. And then, of course, my book, we've looked at a little bit. Half of that is attacking physicalism, and half of that is exploring and ultimately defending Russellian monism. And there's been a huge number of articles published on this topic, so it's an interesting new topic. Okay, so what is Russellian monism? So I think the best way to say it's kind of got a negative component and a positive component. So we'll take both of these in turn. The negative component begins with a claim about a certain gap in the picture of the world we get from the physical sciences. And the best way to get a grip on this claim, I think, is to contrast it with a certain popular optimism there is, I think, about the physical sciences. I think in the public mind, there is this idea that the physical sciences will one day give us a complete description of space, time and matter. That they're on their way, well on their way to giving us this complete account of the nature of space and time and matter. You know, we're not there yet. Our best current theory of the very big, namely general relativity, doesn't fit with our best theory of the very small, namely quantum mechanics. But there's I thought that, you know, one day physicists will dot these I's and cross these T's and present us with the grand unified theory of everything. And that'll be it, the complete story of the nature of space and time and matter. However, what Russell and Eddington realised back in the 1920s is that when you reflect on the kind of information we get from the physical sciences about matter, we discover actually physics doesn't really tell us what matter is. It really only tells us what it does. That's the idea. Physics doesn't really tell us what matter is. It really only tells us what it does. Okay, so let's try and make sense of this claim. So just let's take a kind of really oversimplified example. So what does physics tell us about an electron? Well, a couple of things it tells us, amongst others, is that it has mass and negative charge. As I said, about a mass and amount of negative charge. How does physics characterize these properties, mass and negative charge? Well, physics tells us that things with mass are disposed to attract other things with mass, that's gravity, and things with mass resist acceleration. The more mass something has, the harder it is to accelerate. What is negative charge? Very, very rough and ready answer. Physics tells us that things with negative charge are disposed to repel other things with negative charge and attract things with positive charge. So really, what physics gives us, what physics tells us about these properties is exclusively about the behaviour with which they endow an electron. The information we get from physics about an electron exclusively concerns its behaviour, what it does. Okay, we've just taken two examples, but we find something similar with other properties physics talks about. And we find a similar picture up through the physical sciences. In chemistry, chemical elements and compounds are characterized in terms of A, their causal relationships with other chemical elements and compounds, what they do in relation to other chemical elements and compounds, and their physical constituents. Moving up a layer, neurophysiology, brain states are characterized in terms of their causal relationships with other brain states and bodily or behavioral states, and in terms of their chemical constituents. So, throughout the whole hierarchy of physical sciences, all we really get is information about the behaviour of physical material things, what they do. So this is the starting point of the kind of negative component of Russellian monism. The idea that the physical sciences entirely characterize matter in terms of its behaviour, in terms of what it does. Now, of course, this is very useful information, right? If you know in great deal of detail how matter behaves, you can manipulate it in all sorts of extraordinary ways. This leads to the extraordinary technology we enjoy today. You can build spaceships and lasers and hairdryers and all these wonderful things. But if we merely know, for example, what an electron does, we only know its relationships to other things. For example, how it affects and is affected by other particles, for example. We know nothing about how the electron is in and of itself. Nothing of what philosophers call the intrinsic nature of the electron. So let's try and make this clear, thinking about chess pieces and particles. So think about a chess piece, a real kind of concrete physical chess piece sitting there on a board. Pretend you have it in front of you. What can you know about that chess piece? You could know what it does. It's a king, so it just moves. What does a king do? I don't play chess very often. One space in any direction. I know. It's just testing. King moves, what it does. Or you could know its relationships with other chess pieces. Whether it's on the left or the right or in a certain location in relationship to other chess pieces. But intuitively, that's not all there is to know about the chess piece. We could also know how the chess piece is in and of itself, right? Is it made of wood? Is it made of plastic? Is it made of metal? And this is what philosophers call the intrinsic nature. So there's, it's one thing how is something related to other things, but it's another matter how it is in and of itself. This is what we mean by the intrinsic nature. And it seems intuitively what might say the same about particles, right? Like electrons and protons. Physics just tells us what these things do, their relationships, their causal relationships with other particles. It leaves us completely in the dark as to what an electron is in and of itself, as to its intrinsic nature. And when you think about it, that actually entails that we don't really know the intrinsic nature of the chess piece either. Because you think, what's the intrinsic nature of the chess piece? You think maybe it's made of plastic. But then you look to physical science to tell you what plastic is. You look to chemistry. Chemistry characterizes plastic as of a certain kind in terms of its components, molecular, atomic, subatomic. And then we look to physics to tell us about those components, those atomic and subatomic parts. But as we've already discussed, physics doesn't tell us the intrinsic nature of those components, it just tells us what they do, their relationships. So actually, we find we have no idea really about the intrinsic nature of anything. At least from the at least if we're looking into the physical sciences. So this is what we can call the problem of intrinsic natures. And this is what, in some way or other, Russell and Eddington back in the 1920s were really captivated by. So this is the idea that there must be an intrinsic nature to physical things, like electrons, for example. There must be a way they are in and of themselves. But physical science just tells us absolutely nothing about this. So we think we're getting this complete picture of the nature of space and time and matter. But actually, insofar as we're interested in the intrinsic nature of such things, physics leaves us completely in the dark. And I think this thought has a history going back to Kant and Schopenhauer, but it resurfaces in this particular context back in the 1920s. Okay, so that's the kind of negative aspect of Russellian monism. So far, we haven't mentioned consciousness. But the thought of the Russellian monist is that reflecting on this problem, the problem of intrinsic natures, can help us find a solution to another problem, the problem of consciousness, so the problem we've been wrestling with in this course. Here's one way of defining the problem of consciousness. It seems that we have strong philosophical reason to think that consciousness can't possibly be physical. Looked at a series of arguments, the zombie argument, the knowledge argument, the transparency argument. But we also seem to have strong scientific reason to think that consciousness must be physical. These are the kind of causal closure arguments we've looked at. So it's as though we've got kind of science and philosophy in this existential tug-of-war. One saying that consciousness can't be physical, the other saying, but it must be. So the Russellian monist thinks that reflecting on this first problem, the problem of intrinsic natures, can lead to a solution to this second problem. And here's the basic idea, and we'll look at it in a bit more detail. The idea is, it's our ignorance of the intrinsic nature of matter that leads us to think that consciousness is not physical. That's the idea. Why are we all struggling to make sense of the idea of consciousness being physical? The Russellian monist says it's because of our ignorance of the intrinsic nature of matter. So let's explore this in a little more detail. So this is a question we've been coming back to. How can consciousness be physical? How can a feeling be identical with a brain state? So a standard form of physicalism will say, sometimes physicalism is thought to be the view that the brain produces consciousness, but that's not really physicalism. Physicalism is the view that, or in its standard form at least, that feelings are brain states. So the feeling of pain is just one and the same thing as the brain state C5 is firing. So C5 is firing is our stand-in for whatever brain state might look to be empirically identical with the feeling of pain. It's actually not empirically plausible to identify pain of C5 is firing, but C5 is firing is just our stand-in for some brain state that it might be empirically plausible, or some other kind of state. Doesn't have to be a neurophysiological state, it might be an informational state or a functional state. whatever kind of physical state it might be plausible empirically to identify with, say, the feeling of pain or some more specific conscious state. Okay, so just to, according to a very simple version of this, the feeling of pain, that very feeling you know from the inside, is just one and the same thing as the brain state that the scientist can see in your head and prod and poke in principle. And you know, a lot of people say that can't be true. They can't possibly be the same thing. Feelings and brain states just seem so radically different. How can they possibly be one and the same thing? Well, here's the Russellian Monist solution. Their claim is, well, that physical science characterises C-fibre firing in terms of what it does, or what its parts do, in terms of its causal relationships with other bits of the brain. But C-fibre firing must have an intrinsic nature. There must be some way C-fibre firing is in and of itself. Physical science leaves us completely in the dark about that. Well, the Russellian Monist proposal is, as an answer to the intrinsic nature of C-fibre firing, they say, well, it's the feeling of pain. The feeling of pain just is the intrinsic nature of C-fibre firing. So the idea is, physical science describes brain states, as it were, from the outside, tells us what they do, but from the inside, they are forms of consciousness. So we have this beautifully unified alternative to both physicalism and dualism. In opposition to dualism, the Russellian Monists think there's nothing more to the physical. There aren't immaterial souls or minds, that they're just physical brains and bodies. But in opposition to physicalism, the Russellian Monist claims that there's more to the physical than what physical science tells us about it. This is really the essence. There's more to the physical than what physical science tells us about it. Because physical science just reveals the behaviour of physical things, their relationships with other physical things and what they do, but they also have an intrinsic nature. And it's in that intrinsic nature, at least in part, that consciousness resides. Consciousness resides in the intrinsic nature of the brain. So this is what we're trying to find a place for consciousness in the world. You know, Descartes thinks consciousness is in the soul. We want to try and find a place for it in the brain. The Russellian Monist says, well, it's in the intrinsic nature of the brain. That part, that aspect that physical science remains completely silent on. So it's a beautifully unified view. Even its opponents have expressed admiration for its theoretical virtues. So Elissa Ney is a very committed physicalist. She has a paper attacking Russellian Monism in the Alta Walter volume. It's not Alta Walter, sorry, Alta and Nagasawa. Alta Walter volumes on phenomenal concepts. And even though she ultimately rejects Russellian Monism, she's also saying, this proposal strikes me, suspending disbelief about the theses that lead up to it, as at least as bold and exciting as Newton's proposed identification of terrestrial and cosmic reality. So I think, this was a really exciting idea Russell and Eddington were getting at. It's incredible that it was forgotten about for so long. Okay, so that's kind of the basic idea. Let's just think a little bit about how this is supposed to solve the zombie problem. It's a little bit more complicated, but you can kind of look back on it. Okay, so zombies, remember the definition of a zombie is a physical duplicate of a human being, which lacks consciousness. And remember the argument is roughly, zombies seem to be conceivable. If they're conceivable, then they're possible. If they're possible, physicalism can't possibly be true. How does the Russellian Monist respond to this argument? So what they would draw attention to, they would say, well, there's a certain ambiguity in the definition of this term physical duplicate that I've underlined. And that leads to a certain ambiguity in the notion of a zombie. We can actually distinguish two different definitions of a zombie. So it's I'm going to call superficial zombies and deep zombies. So here the definition. So a superficial zombie is a non-conscious creature that is indiscernible from a human being in terms of its behaviour and the behaviour of its parts. A deep zombie is a non-conscious creature that's indiscernible from a human being in terms of its intrinsic nature and the intrinsic nature of its parts. So once you distinguish these, the Russellian Monist says, okay, so, sure, superficial zombies are conceivable and possible, you know. It could be a creature that behaves just like us and all its parts behave just like all of our parts. But we've got no good reason to think that deep zombies are either conceivable or possible. And that's because consciousness might be part of the intrinsic nature of the human brain. We've got no reason to deny that, and perhaps good scientific reason to think that is the case. And so if consciousness is part of the intrinsic nature of Garrett's brain, then you couldn't possibly conceive of the intrinsic nature of Garrett's brain. You couldn't possibly conceive that brain in terms of its intrinsic nature, that is, in terms of its consciousness, and also conceive of it as lacking consciousness. Because that would be conceiving of something as having and lacking consciousness, which is blatantly contradictory. So this is the Russellian Monist proposal, right? That consciousness resides in the intrinsic nature of the brain. And if that's true, then there's no reason to think that deep zombies are either conceivable or possible. And if that's the case, then the zombie argument really is no threat to this proposal of the Russellian Monist for accommodating consciousness. Okay, so I just want to finish before we discuss this, by just reflecting a little on the implications of this view. So I think it really turns the mind-body problem on its head, upside down. On a traditional approach to the mind-body problem that I think is still dominant, the idea is, the starting point is the brain is the thing we understand. That's what we really have a good grip on through physical science. It's consciousness that's mysterious. Consciousness is the thing we need to work out what to say about. The Russellian Monist thinks it's precisely the other way around, right? It's matter that is mysterious. Physical science tells us nothing about its intrinsic nature. In fact, the only thing we know about the intrinsic nature of matter is that some of it, i.e. the matter in brains, involves consciousness. That's the only thing we know about it, about the intrinsic nature of matter, that the stuff in brains, at least, involves consciousness. Everything else, chess pieces, electrons, we've no idea. We have good information from physical science on what these things do, but we just have no idea about their intrinsic nature. The only thing we know about the intrinsic nature of matter is that some of it involves consciousness. So I'm inclined to think, this is a new view and there's lots of people thinking about what it implies. I'm inclined to think that not only is it an attractive solution to the mind-body problem, to the problem of consciousness, but that it has profound implications for the whole project of trying to find out what reality is like. So this is what we're ultimately interested in. How do we know what reality is like? Right? That's the big question. Methodological naturalists like Daniel Dennett, who we looked at last week, they would say, well, we should look to and only to the data of observation and experiment, right? Look to third-person empirical science to tell you what reality is like. Everything else is just wild metaphysical speculation. But for the Russellian Monist, this leads to two problems. Firstly, this data tells us nothing about the intrinsic nature of matter. So if you're just going with that information, you're going to have a huge gap in your theory of the world. The second problem, there is another source of data. We know through introspection, through our immediate awareness of our own conscious experience, that consciousness is part of the intrinsic nature of brains. We know that fact about reality, and that's not a fact about reality you can know from physical science. You can't do an experiment to see consciousness in brains or prove that there's consciousness in the brain. You know that through your own immediate awareness of your consciousness. You know that consciousness is part of the intrinsic nature of brains. And that's surely a fact that should feed into our theory of nature reality. That's surely something we should have as a point of data. in trying to formulate our best guess at what reality is like. So in the final chapter of my book, which we're not going to do a session on, but you might be interested, so I propose an alternative to methodological naturalism grounded in Russellian monism. And basically the simple idea is, in trying to, how do we answer this question? How do we know what reality is like? The analytic phenomenologist claims that we should try and find the most simple, elegant, parsimonious theory consistent with both the data of observation experiment and the reality of consciousness. So both these sources of data should feed into our theory of the world. And then crucially, it's only on that basis that I try to defend panpsychism. So that's also what we're going to look at it as one form of panpsychism is one form of Russellian monism, not the only. So let's just finish by trying to understand the rationale for taking this view seriously. So panpsychism is that all matter in its fundamental nature involves consciousness. So electrons, protons, the fundamental constituents of the physical world have some kind of conscious experience of a very, very basic, simple kind. It's not saying electrons have thoughts or existential angst, it's just saying they have some very basic kind of conscious experience. Now, most people still think of this view as just too insane to take seriously, although it is becoming more respected in analytic philosophy of mind, but still a lot of people just think this is insane. But I think that motivation is largely results from a kind of implicit commitment to something like methodological naturalism. So if we start from the popular optimism that I started off by talking about, that the physical sciences are giving us this complete story of the fundamental nature of space, time and matter, then of course panpsychism looks implausible because physics is not telling us that electrons are conscious. But for the Russellian monist, there's a completely different starting point, right? So according to Russellian monism, our epistemological starting point is not physical science is giving us this complete story of the world. For the Russellian monist, our epistemological starting point is that the only thing we know about the intrinsic nature of matter is that some of it, i.e. the stuff in brains, involves consciousness. Everything else we're completely in the dark about. That's our kind of epistemological starting point in trying to speculate, have our best guess at what the world we find ourselves in is like. And from that starting point, once it takes a bit of time to really kind of think your way into that starting point, but from that starting point, I would argue that it's pretty plausible that the most simple, elegant, parsimonious theory consistent with the data is panpsychism. So it might not be true, but what we want to do is take the data we have and try to formulate the most simple, elegant, parsimonious theory consistent with that data. And if, of course this is a big if we start from the epistemological starting point of the Russellian monism, there's a fairly good case that theory, the most simple, elegant theory consisting of data, is something like panpsychism. So that's why I think it is a view that we should at least take quite seriously. Okay, so that's all I want to say for the moment. What do you think?